The world knew Michael Jackson as a legend, a performer who changed music forever, a voice that defined generations, and an artist whose influence reached millions of people around the globe. But as the years passed, something else began to capture the world's attention. Not his music, not his performances, his face. Every new appearance created questions. Every photograph started new debates. People wanted to know what had changed, what was real, and what was hidden behind the image they saw. But Michael Jackson's changing appearance was never just a story about looks. Behind the headlines was a human being who spent his entire life under a level of fame that few people could ever understand, constantly watched, judged, and analyzed by the world. From a young boy who became a superstar to an icon carrying impossible expectations, Michael Jackson's journey was shaped by success, pressure, personal struggles, and a desire to be understood. So what really happened to Michael Jackson's face? Was it simply about transformation? Or was there a much deeper story behind the changes everyone noticed? This is the untold story behind Michael Jackson's changing appearance, and the reality behind the face the world never stopped watching. Before Michael Jackson became one of the most famous entertainers in history, he was a young boy with a rare talent that the world had never seen before. Growing up in Gary, Indiana, Michael discovered music at an early age. Along with his brothers, he became part of the group that would later become known as the Jackson 5. Their energetic performances and unforgettable sound quickly caught the attention of audiences around the world. By the late 1960s, Michael was already a star. Millions of people watched a young boy with an incredible voice perform on stage. His talent seemed effortless, and many believed he was destined for greatness. But while the world saw the success, they did not always see the pressure behind it. Michael was growing up in front of cameras, audiences, and constant expectations. While other children were experiencing a normal childhood, his life was centered around rehearsals, recording sessions, and performances. From a very young age, Michael learned that his appearance, behavior, and talent were always being observed. As he moved from a child performer into an adult artist, he faced a difficult challenge, creating his own identity while carrying the image that millions of people had already built around him. The world remembered the little boy with the powerful voice, but Michael wanted to be seen as a serious artist who could create his own future. That transformation would eventually lead him to become one of the biggest stars the world had ever known. However, with incredible fame came something else. A level of public attention where even personal changes would become a global discussion. And this is where the story of Michael Jackson's changing appearance truly began. By the end of the 1970s, Michael Jackson was determined to prove that he was more than just a former child star. He wanted the world to see him as a complete artist, someone who could create music, control his own image, and build a legacy beyond the success of the Jackson 5. In 1979, Michael released Off the Wall, his first major solo album as an adult. The album became a huge success and changed how the world viewed him. He was no longer only the talented young singer from a famous family, he was becoming a superstar in his own right. But this new level of success also brought a new level of pressure. During this period, Michael Jackson's appearance began receiving more attention. According to reports, after breaking his nose during a dance rehearsal, Michael underwent his first rhinoplasty. The procedure was connected to the injury, but it also became the beginning of years of public discussion about his changing appearance. At this stage, the changes were not the dramatic transformation that people would later associate with him. However, as Michael's career continued growing, the pressure to maintain a certain image increased. The entertainment industry placed enormous importance on appearance, and Michael was becoming one of the most visible people on earth. Then came the moment that changed everything. The release of Thriller turned Michael Jackson into a global phenomenon. He was no longer just a successful musician, he was a cultural icon. But with worldwide fame came something unexpected. The world began watching every detail of his life. His music videos were analyzed, his performances were studied, and his appearance became a topic of constant conversation. The same audience that celebrated his creativity also began questioning his personal choices. For Michael Jackson, fame created a difficult reality. The more successful he became, the less privacy he had. And as the 1980s continued, his changing appearance would become one of the most discussed topics in entertainment history. The release of Thriller changed Michael Jackson's life forever. What began as an ambitious project became one of the biggest cultural moments in music history. The album broke records, changed the entertainment industry, and transformed Michael into a global superstar unlike anyone before him. But becoming the most famous person in the world came with a hidden cost. Michael Jackson was no longer just an artist performing on stage. He had become a person whose every move was being watched by millions. His clothing, his dance style, his music videos, and even his personal life became topics of worldwide discussion. And then, slowly, another conversation started becoming louder. His appearance. As photographs from different periods appeared, people began comparing his changing features. Media outlets started focusing heavily on his face, creating stories and theories about what changes had taken place. Some reports were based on real observations, while others were exaggerated by tabloids looking for attention. The problem was that Michael Jackson's appearance had become a public subject. For most people, personal changes remain private. But Michael was living under a microscope. A simple difference in appearance was no longer just a personal matter. It became international news. Then, in 1984, Michael experienced one of the most painful moments of his career. While filming a Pepsi commercial in Los Angeles, a special effects accident caused his hair to catch fire, resulting in serious burns to his scalp. The accident required medical treatment and created another challenge for someone whose image was already under constant attention. Behind the headlines was a person dealing with pain and recovery, but the public mostly saw photographs. They saw changes, they created opinions. They rarely saw the full story behind them. By this point, Michael Jackson had reached the highest level of fame possible. However, the same fame that made him a legend also made every personal struggle impossible to hide. And in the years ahead, the discussion surrounding his appearance would become even more intense, often overshadowing the music and achievements that made him famous in the first place. By the late 1980s, Michael Jackson had already achieved what most artists could only dream of. After the success of Thriller, the world was waiting to see what he would do next. In 1987, he released Bad, another successful album that proved he was not just a one-time phenomenon. His creativity, performances, and influence continued to grow. But at the same time, something else was happening. The conversation around Michael Jackson was changing. Instead of only discussing his music, his dance moves, and his achievements, the media became increasingly focused on his appearance. Every public appearance created new headlines. Every photograph was analyzed. Every visible change became a topic of debate. Michael Jackson had become an artist whose image was almost as famous as his work. He was known for perfection, carefully controlling every detail of his performances and public presentations. But his physical appearance was something the public felt they had the right to judge. During this period, tabloids often exaggerated stories about Michael's appearance. Sensational headlines created a larger mystery around him, sometimes making assumptions without understanding the reality behind the changes. What many people overlooked was that Michael was also dealing with the challenges of being human. Aging, injuries, health concerns, personal decisions. All of these things can affect a person's appearance. But for Michael Jackson, nothing happened privately. The entire world was watching. The more famous he became, the more difficult it was to separate the artist from the image created around him. By the end of the 1980s, a strange contradiction had developed. Michael Jackson was one of the most admired performers in history, yet discussions about his appearance often became louder than discussions about his talent. The world celebrated his music, but it also constantly questioned his transformation. And this became one of the biggest challenges of his life, trying to exist as a person while the world focused on the image. As Michael entered the 1990s, the pressure surrounding his appearance, privacy, and personal struggles would become even more intense. The 1990s brought a new chapter in Michael Jackson's life. Professionally, he was still one of the biggest entertainers in the world. His concerts attracted millions of fans, his influence continued growing, and his music remained powerful across generations. But away from the stage, the pressure surrounding his personal life was becoming heavier. By this time, Michael Jackson's appearance had become a subject that the public constantly discussed. Instead of focusing only on his achievements, many people became obsessed with analyzing every change they noticed. Photographs became evidence, headlines became theories, and opinions often appeared before the truth was known. During this period, Michael reportedly continued receiving medical treatments related to previous issues and his appearance. Some procedures were connected to correcting complications, while others were related to maintaining the image expected from someone constantly living in the public eye. One major challenge came from the lasting effects of the Pepsi accident years earlier. The scalp injury had created long-term problems, and Michael continued searching for solutions. However, the public rarely saw the reality behind these struggles. They saw the finished image. They did not see the recovery process. They did not see the personal challenges happening away from cameras. This was one of the hardest parts of Michael Jackson's fame. The world expected him to remain a perfect, larger-than-life figure, but behind the superstar image was a person dealing with real human challenges. During the 1990s, privacy also became almost impossible for Michael. A normal personal decision could become worldwide news within hours. A change in appearance could create international debate. And the more people talked about the image, the harder it became for them to understand the person behind it. The biggest misunderstanding surrounding Michael Jackson was that people often focused on what changed without asking why it changed. They saw the transformation. They rarely saw the circumstances behind it. As the decade continued, Michael Jackson's story became less about appearance alone and more about the cost of living under constant attention. A superstar who had everything the world could imagine was also someone trying to find peace in a life where almost nothing remained private. As Michael Jackson entered the 2000s, the discussion surrounding his appearance followed him more than ever before. At this stage of his life, Michael was carrying decades of public attention, previous injuries, health challenges, and the pressure of maintaining an image that millions of people had followed for years. In 2001, he released Invincible, his final studio album. While his influence as an artist remained undeniable, many public conversations focused less on his music and more on his appearance. Photographs from this period once again became the center of attention. People compared older images with newer ones. They searched for explanations. They created theories. But what was often missing was a deeper understanding of the person behind those images. A person's appearance can change for many reasons. Aging, medical conditions, injuries, treatments, and personal choices can all influence how someone looks over time. In Michael Jackson's case, every change happened in front of the entire world. Nothing was private. Reports suggested that Michael continued receiving treatments during his later years, including procedures intended to address previous issues and maintain a more natural appearance. However, the media often focused on the visual result rather than the circumstances behind it. A single photograph could create worldwide discussion. A small change could become a major headline. And once again, the image became more famous than the person. The tragedy of Michael Jackson's story is that his appearance often became the main conversation, while his creativity and achievements were sometimes pushed into the background. The world remembered the changes, but it often forgot the journey. Behind the face that millions analyzed was an artist who changed music forever. a performer who inspired generations, and a person who spent his life under a level of attention almost impossible to imagine. When Michael Jackson passed away in 2009, the world lost one of the greatest entertainers in history. But the question about his appearance remained. What really happened to Michael Jackson's face? Perhaps the answer is more complicated than people ever realized. For decades, the world tried to understand Michael Jackson by looking at his face. People compared photographs. They discussed changes. They searched for explanations. But the truth is, a person's entire story can never be understood by a single image. Michael Jackson's appearance became one of the most discussed topics in entertainment history, but behind that discussion was a much deeper human story. It was the story of a young boy who became famous before he was old enough to understand the pressure of fame. It was the story of an artist who changed music forever. And it was the story of a person who lived his entire life under the eyes of the world. The changes people noticed were connected to many parts of his journey. Injuries, personal choices, aging, medical challenges, and the incredible pressure of maintaining an image in front of millions. But perhaps the biggest question was never just, what happened to Michael Jackson's face? The bigger question was, what happened to the person behind that face? Because behind every headline, every photograph, and every public opinion was a human being who wanted to create, inspire, and be understood. Michael Jackson's legacy was never defined only by his appearance. It was defined by the music he created, the people he inspired, and the impact he left behind. What do you think about Michael Jackson's transformation? Was the world too focused on his appearance and not enough on his story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For more deep documentary stories about the hidden side of legendary figures, subscribe and stay connected.